Real quick, just stepping in to remind everyone that I have a movie channel. Check out my movie channel if you want. It's Jackson Kruger Movies. The link is in the description below, so if you're tired of just hearing my bad sports takes and want to also hear some bad movie takes, make sure you check that out. Again, link is in the description below. All right, let's get negative here. These are my picks for the 7 most overrated head coaches in football. And listen, I feel like I'll look at some of these lists of like most overrated, and people just like don't mention people who they actually think are overrated. It'll be someone like Mike McCarthy, like he's always on these lists, which like no, he's not overrated. Like plenty of people criticize him. The goal I am going for here is when I say a name, your first reaction is, what? How could you say he's overrated? And then hopefully I give my perspective on it, and you're like, okay, I get it now. Maybe I don't agree, but I understand at least where you're coming from. That's what I'm going for here. So we'll see if I pull that off. But yeah, let's get into the list. This is starting off with number 7. I went with Zach Taylor, who I guess I could argue is in the Mike McCarthy tier. He is someone who does get criticism. I don't know. I mean, listen, the guy's been to a Super Bowl. He, did a great job at developing the young players. I think he got a bit too much credit for that when it happened. He was in like Coach of the Year candidacy. I've never been as crazy about his X's and O's. I was always lower on him than most people were. I do acknowledge that I was too hard on him early on. I think that there are some good traits of his coaching as a whole. But, again, I kind of view him as like a mid-tier head coach. I think some people would view him as a good but not great head coach. So that's why I decided to put him on the list here. Number 6 is Brian Daboll. This is going to require some explaining, as a lot of these are. Brian Daboll is a guy who won Coach of the Year 2 years ago, and last year really struggled. And I want to be clear, I'm not putting him on this list because of how last year went. I think that was mostly outside of his control. That was not a very talented team. What are you supposed to do? 2 years ago, the team massively overperformed. It was not a great team that year either, and yet they made the playoffs. He won Coach of the Year. The reason why I put him on this list is not because I think he's a bad coach. It's because I think that maybe we jumped to the conclusion of the reason that the Giants made the playoffs 2 years ago was simply due to coaching. The coaching was good. I'm not saying it wasn't, but I think there was an element of luck in that year as well that doesn't get talked about because no one ever talks about luck. It all has to be something. It all has to be credit for something. Like, no, sometimes the team just gets a little lucky. I think that's what happened with the Giants, along with good coaching. So I think he's a solid coach. I don't think he's a bad coach by any means. I don't know what to make of him in a lot of ways. I think he's very much we need more information before we can crown him as a good coach. And a lot of people, I think, crowned him as a good coach early on. So that's why he makes the list. Number 5 is Antonio Pierce. Don't get too mad, Raiders fans. I'm not saying he stinks or he can't be good. It's similar to Daboll in the sense of I think people are jumping to the conclusion of he's good too early. I just don't think there's enough information to say Antonio Pierce is a good head coach. He hasn't really shown a ton. Now, again, players love him. That's very, very important for sure. The fans love him. That's important too. But at the same time, there are, I didn't love some of the game management stuff. He looked like a guy who was maybe not fully ready to be a head coach last year, but still had some great moments. And I think that maybe with a full year, he could become a good head coach. But I think people are already talking about him as though he's a good head coach. And I'm like, he's to me a full let's wait and see guy. And number 3, well, this will cheer Raiders fans up, I suppose, putting Andy Reid on the list. But okay, this is one that's going to take some explaining as well. I feel like everyone's already going to get mad at me in the comments, but what are you going to do? I'm making a provocative list. I guess it's on me. Andy Reid is my number 2 coach in football. So I am not saying Andy Reid is a bad head coach or, even I'm not even saying he's not a good head coach. I'm not even saying he's not a great head coach. He is an amazing head coach. The thing I feel like that kind of frustrates me is it almost feels like no one acknowledges that he does some dumb things sometimes. Like he's way too cautious on 4th downs, which just doesn't make sense. In the playoffs, he tends to be better, so maybe that's why people don't notice it. But traditionally, they're usually towards the bottom of the pack in 4th down decision making, despite the fact that his quarterback is Patrick Mahomes. He should be going for it all the time. And on these 4th downs, they're very often running the football, which is just, again, not what you should be doing. If it's 4th and 1, like we saw in the Super Bowl, keep it in Mahomes' hands. In the big moments, he doesn't make those mistakes. But just because, I feel like there's some critiques that I have of his that I don't think gets talked about, I put him on the list. Again, people think overrated means bad. You can be a Hall of Fame level head coach and also be overrated. In my opinion, that's what Andy Reid is. Number 3, I put Kevin Stefanski on the list, a guy who, listen, I mean, you know what, 2-time Coach of the Year, like, a lot of really good stuff with Kevin Stefanski. I'm not saying he's a bad head coach. I do think, though, for me personally, I think he's just like a quality, like solid, good head coach. Like, that's just where I view him. I don't consider him a great head coach because when I watch the film, the X's and O's are usually solid, but he kind of just does, like, yeah, what you should be doing. Like, oh, our running game's working, let's run the football. Like, he's not a Kyle Shanahan in the way he's scheming stuff up. He's certainly not an Andy Reid in the way he's scheming this stuff up. He's, just a solid, like, does the right thing, is traditionally like an all right head coach. He's kind of a, someone who you can't critique. I'm not saying he's a bad head coach. Like I said, overrated doesn't mean bad, but I think that sometimes, due to the fact that he's had 2 really good years, I just don't know if for me personally, last year, I would not have given him the award. I would have given it to Kyle Shanahan for what he did X's and O's wise that year. I think giving it to him the Baker Mayfield year was justified. But as a whole, I think that, because he has 2 Coach of the Years, I feel people put him in like the elite tier. He's not that for me. Number 2, I did go Matt Eberflus here, who, like, again, it's weird. Like, putting him on this list is kind of what I talked about earlier of, like, are people really going to sit here and say, what? I think he's a great head coach. This is more so, I think he's I don't think there's any like bad head coaches this year in the NFL, but I think he's kind of like that, okay, fine head coach. Like, I guess you're not the worst thing in the world. And I think people talk about him as like, oh, he's solid. So, like, okay, that's maybe not the biggest needle mover in the world. I just think that, yes, the defense did have a nice turnaround last year. They also added a player, Montez Sweat, that certainly helped. He does deserve credit for what he did defensively, though. I'm not going to take that away from him. I think that people are kind of underlooking how tough this offense has been ran in the Eberflus era. Maybe it'll change with a new quarterback, but because of that, I'm putting him at number 2. And number 1, I am putting my guy, Todd Bowles, who, as a Bucs fan, I still have a lot of respect for and still like. Like I said, overrated doesn't necessarily mean bad. He's in the same tier that Eberflus is in for me, of like the not great tier. Todd Bowles got Coach of the Year votes last year, which was just absurd. I mean, the fact that he legitimately got put in that discussion, and not a lot, not loudly, but he was put in that discussion last year, despite the fact that I think he was kind of the primary reason that season started off so slow, was just not good. Now, he's improved in a lot of ways. The game management has gotten a lot better. Offensive coaching has gotten better, marginally better. That's all very good, but like, put him in the Coach of the Year conversation was just silly, and everyone wasn't doing it, but there were people who were doing it. It's simply just looking at wins and losses, because even his defensive coaching wasn't that great last year, which is usually his selling point. I still think he's a good defensive coach. I think that was largely due to injuries, but as a whole, I don't know. That was weird, so that's why I put him here at number 1 on the list. But yeah, those are my thoughts. I'm sure the comment section will have plenty of thoughts reacting to it. But hey, again, hopefully this is something where we can just have a good time, give our opinions, and not get too heated about it, because I enjoy doing these kind of lists. Hope you enjoy watching them. Let me know what your thoughts were in the comments below. Always love hearing from y'all. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.